There are some storylines in the Bible that were swept under the carpet for the sake of missionary peace. Stories so mysterious, so controversial, that many chose to overlook them, preferring to focus on what was comfortable and palatable for the masses. But buried within the ancient scriptures are tales that challenge everything we think we know about the world's history. And today, we venture into one of the most enigmatic and perplexing pieces of biblical history. Who are the Nephilim? What are their origins, and why have they remained so shrouded in mystery? Do they have any connection to the Anakim, those giants who once struck terror into the hearts of ancient Israel? How did these beings come into existence, and what role did they play in shaping the world as we know it? These myths, these truths, were kept hidden from the public eye for many unforeseen reasons. But in today's video, we are going to unravel this piece of ancient history, bringing light to the forgotten sons of the Watchers. Before we proceed, kindly hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification icon so you'll be the first to know when we drop our next content. You won't want to miss what's coming next as we uncover the secrets that have been kept hidden for millennia. The earth was not silent in those days. It groaned. It wept. It bled. Long before the flood, before Noah even knew the sound of rain, a strange shift began in the spiritual realm. The heavens, once sealed to keep the divine and human separate, trembled with unrest. And at the heart of that unrest were them, the Watchers. They were not ordinary angels. They were a special class, assigned not to war or worship, but to watch and report. Their gaze was meant to stay fixed on man from afar. But curiosity turned to desire, and desire into rebellion. In the days when men began to multiply upon the earth, the Watchers came down. They didn't fall like Lucifer and his host. They descended. Slowly. Deliberately. Their leader was named Semyaza, a being of immense beauty and authority. He stood upon Mount Hermon and gathered 200 of his kind. What he proposed was unthinkable. They would break heaven's law and take human women as wives. The stars above held their breath. Heaven looked away. Earth did not understand. They swore an oath. Each of the 200 angels bound themselves in eternal rebellion, knowing the price. They sealed the pact with a curse, that none would back out once the first had crossed the veil. And then, like falling stars, they came, one after another, into the realm of men. They didn't take kingdoms. Not yet. They came in secret, disguised in radiant forms. They appeared as gods to the daughters of men, tall, glowing, voices like thunder, eyes like fire. And the women? They were drawn, helpless against the pull. Seduced by power, blinded by beauty. What was born from that union would shake the world. The children of the Watchers were not ordinary. They were giants. Not just in size, but in intellect, in strength, in hunger. They were called the Nephilim, which means fallen ones, or more directly, those who cause others to fall. They were the corrupted hybrids of heaven and earth, and they were never meant to exist. They grew faster than men, stronger, smarter, and soon more violent. They became kings over cities, warriors of renown. The old myths, of titans, of demigods, of beings who ruled before the age of man, came from them. And with them came secrets. The Watchers did more than take wives. They taught men things they were never meant to know. The Zazel taught the art of war, how to forge swords, how to kill with precision. Others revealed sorcery, enchantments, the power of herbs for abortion and the summoning of spirits. One taught astrology, another divination. Humanity leapt forward in knowledge, but downward in spirit. The earth was now infected. The Nephilim turned savage. Their hunger was unnatural. When food ran low, they turned on animals. When animals were not enough, they turned on men. Cannibalism. Blood rituals. Hybrid experiments. Even the animals began to change. The bloodline of creation was being rewritten by darkness. God saw it all, and the silence of heaven broke. A decision was made in the highest realm. Not just to punish the Watchers, but to cleanse the world. But not yet. One man still walked righteously. One bloodline had not been touched by the corruption. Noah. But Noah didn't know the full story yet. He just knew something was deeply wrong. The skies were different. The ground cried out. The shadows grew longer, And the rumors of giants in the north were no longer tales, they were warnings. And deep beneath the mountains, the watchers began to whisper. They had seen the signs. Judgment was coming, but they had not expected it so soon. This is how it began, not with thunder or fire, but with the descent of forbidden beings and the rise of children who should never have walked the earth. The hidden story of the Nephilim had begun. And nothing would ever be the same. The Nephilim walked the earth like kings, but their reign was built on terror. They did not rule by wisdom or justice. They ruled by fear. The ground quaked beneath their feet. Whole villages vanished in a single night. Mothers hushed their children with trembling lips, warning them not to stray too far, for the giants had scouts, and they were always hungry. Some Nephilim stood 3 times the height of a man. Others towered higher still. Their skin was like stone. Their voices could crack mountains. They laughed at the weapons of men. Spears bent against their limbs. Arrows shattered against their chests. And their appetite? It was endless. They devoured livestock. Then wild beasts. But it was not enough. Eventually, they turned on mankind. Not as enemies in war, but as prey. They hunted men for sport. For food. For pleasure. Some drank blood. Others demanded sacrifices. Their cruelty had no limit. But worse than their size or hunger was their power over the minds of men. They were worshipped. The descendants of Cain, already distant from God, saw the Nephilim as gods among men. They carved statues of them, built shrines in their honor, offered their children to please them. The line between man and monster blurred, and darkness began to spread across the world, not just physically, but spiritually. And in the heavens, the cries of the earth grew louder. Angels who remained loyal to God looked down in sorrow. The watchers had not just corrupted themselves, they had opened a door that could not easily be closed. The world was becoming something else. Twisted. Unnatural. A dark age was rising, one where truth was forgotten, and evil wore the face of divinity. Noah walked through it all. A righteous man in an age of monsters. He lived quietly, avoided the cities, refused the knowledge passed down by the watchers. He taught his sons to resist the temptation of power. But even he could not escape the fear. He had seen them. One evening, when the sky turned copper and the air smelled like metal, Noah had taken his youngest son to the river. The boy ran ahead to gather stones. And then the earth shook. A shadow, massive and moving, fell over the trees. It was not a beast. It was a boy. A Nephilim child. Twice the height of a grown man. Eyes black as pitch. Muscles rippling under skin like bronze. He was smiling. Not cruelly but curiously. Like a lion might look at a rabbit. Noah stood between the child and his son. There was no weapon in his hand. Only a silent prayer. The Nephilim child tilted his head, blinked slowly, then turned and walked away, his footsteps leaving craters in the soil. But the message was clear. They were watching too. That night, Noah could not sleep. And in the silence, God spoke. He did not shout. His voice came like wind through the leaves. But it was clear. The end of all flesh had been decided. The corruption was complete. The earth would be cleansed. But Noah would be spared. He and his family. But Noah could not rejoice. His heart was heavy. He knew what must come. The world would drown. But before the rain, before the ark, before the fountains of the deep were broken, there would be a reckoning. The giants would not go quietly. And the watchers, hidden in the high places, were preparing for war. The flood was coming, but not before blood. They were not just giants. They were a curse walking in human form, monuments of rebellion, echoes of a forbidden union that twisted the order of creation. The Nephilim weren't just tall, they were terrifying. Some stood over 20 feet. Others had 6 fingers, double rows of teeth, and eyes that shimmered unnaturally under the sun. Their bodies were hardened like stone, their voices deep enough to rattle bone. When they stepped, the ground moaned beneath them. But it wasn't their size that shook the world, it was their influence. From the mountains of Bashan to the plains of Shinar, the Nephilim began to rule like gods. Their fathers, the fallen watchers, whispered secrets to them, forbidden knowledge, hidden arts, ancient mysteries not meant for human minds. And with this knowledge, the giants built cities that defied the heavens. They erected walls so tall that birds refused to fly over them. They sculpted weapons from metals no man had seen. And they performed experiments, mixing creatures, blending species, reshaping the natural world. They played God with blood. The records buried in ancient scrolls, those not canonized, speak of hybrid beasts, men with lion heads, flying reptiles controlled by thought, and women who bore monstrous children with inhuman appetites. These were the hidden days. The days before the flood erased the world's shame. But some memories never drowned. The Nephilim became cannibals. When their cattle ran dry, they turned to men. And when men grew scarce, they devoured each other. A great civil war broke out among them, clan against clan, bloodline against bloodline. Whole valleys were filled with bones. But they didn't just kill. They enslaved. Men were made to build monuments to their masters. Women were taken, not for marriage, but for breeding. The Nephilim weren't content with being kings. They wanted to become gods, to replace God himself. They crafted idols in their own images. They forced humans to bow, to sacrifice, to worship. And all this time, the Watchers watched from the heights. Mount Hermon, the Andes, the Himalayas, high places where their thrones were hidden in smoke and fire. They watched their sons rule, believing they had beaten the order of heaven. But heaven was watching too. The cries of mankind had reached the throne room of the Almighty. The blood of the innocent screamed from the ground. And God, slow to anger but just in judgment, prepared to act. But before the wrath came, there was mercy. A warning. A man. Noah. While the world indulged in chaos, Noah walked with God. He wasn't perfect, but he was untouched. His bloodline was clean. Not just morally, but genetically. The Nephilim's corruption had not touched him. He still carried the original design, the image of God unmarred by angelic defilement. And so he was chosen. But Noah had questions. Why were the stars falling? Why did the rivers run red in the north? Why did whispers of giants fill the dreams of children? He prayed. He waited. And one night, God answered, not in thunder, but in clarity. Noah, the end of all flesh is near. The warning wasn't for him alone. It was for the Watchers. For the Nephilim. For every corrupted soul who danced in the dark thinking heaven had forgotten. But the Watchers would not surrender. When they learned of Noah's calling, they panicked. They sent messengers, disguised as men, to tempt him, bribe him, confuse him. They offered him cities, women, power. They said the world didn't need to end, that he could be part of the new order. Noah refused. So they changed tactics. One night, while Noah gathered wood for the ark, he was surrounded. 3 giants. Faces like carved obsidian. Voices like cracked thunder. They didn't speak, they stared. One leaned down, inches from Noah's face, and smiled. But Noah's eyes didn't flinch. And in that moment they saw it, something in him that terrified them. Not strength, not size, but a presence. A divine covering. They backed away, hissing in a tongue lost to mankind. The Nephilim knew they were running out of time. And the Watchers, once arrogant, grew restless. The veil between realms was shifting again. The sky changed color at dusk. The animals grew silent. The earth groaned. And far above the clouds, a different kind of army was preparing to descend. The curse was not just upon the Nephilim, it was upon the land, the air, the blood. Everything they had touched was rotting from the inside out. The infection was too deep for healing. Only judgment could cut it out. But the giants didn't care. If the world was ending, they would burn it down with them. They began building towers, not to reach heaven, but to challenge it. Great ziggurats of black stone, infused with rituals, built at the 4 corners of the earth. They summoned spirits. They called on the names of old gods, names that were once angels. Names that had fallen. And something answered. But even they didn't expect what would come next. The Watchers who refused to bow. They once stood before the throne of God, clothed in radiant light, assigned as guardians, messengers, and watchers over mankind. But now, they stood in shadows, chained not by iron, but by their own pride. These were the Watchers. 200 of them had fallen, not by force, but by choice. They had looked upon the daughters of men and burned with desire. And for that moment of lust, they traded eternity for a curse. Led by one named Semjaza, they made a blood pact upon Mount Hermon, swearing to never turn back. It was not just a rebellion. It was war against the very design of heaven. They had names that once echoed in divine halls: Arakiel, Barakijal, Nasul, and Kokabil. Now, they were whispered in fear, in ancient tongues buried under desert sands and forbidden scrolls. They had taught mankind more than just knowledge. They'd polluted innocence with forbidden truth. It began with small things. Semjaza taught sorcery, how to command spirits and manipulate energies unseen. Asel revealed how to forge weapons of destruction, crafting swords that could split stone and armor that defied fire. Kokabil unveiled the mysteries of stars and seasons, twisting God's calendar for dark rituals. And Armoros taught the art of deception, how to bend words, twist oaths, and curse with precision. Women became tools. Men became worshippers. Children became sacrifices. Mankind didn't just fall, they sprinted into darkness. The Watchers didn't regret it, at least not at first. They believed they had reshaped the world, unlocked power even the angels above envied. But as the Nephilim, their hybrid sons, grew in size and evil, something began to shift. The Watchers no longer controlled their creations. The Nephilim began to question their fathers. They turned against them. Some even tried to reach beyond them, attempting to ascend to the stars themselves. Rituals were held to summon even older beings, entities not bound to this earth. Ancient chaos. And God was silent. For a time. But the Watchers began to feel it, like a cold wind before a storm. A pressure in the air. The skies changed color. Animals turned against their masters. And in the heavens, a figure stirred, an angel not like the others. One who held no mercy in his face. The archangel Raphael had been sent. He descended not with words, but with wrath. The moment he touched earth, the mountains trembled. The very ground seemed to weep. His blade was forged by the breath of God, burning with holy fire no demon could resist. He sought Asael first. Asael had made his throne in a hollowed volcano, surrounded by molten rivers and guarded by Nephilim giants. But not even fire could hide him from the eyes of the archangel. Raphael descended through the flame like a phantom. With one strike, he shattered Asael's body, but he did not kill him. Instead, Raphael bound Asael with heavenly cords, chains forged in the heart of eternity, unbreakable by any earthly or spiritual means. The Watcher cried out, his voice echoing across the realms. It wasn't pain that broke him, it was shame. He had once stood in glory, now he lay chained beneath the sands, sealed inside the dark abyss of Dudiel, awaiting the judgment of the great day. But Asael was only the beginning. Raphael, joined by Uriel, Michael, and Gabriel, began the great purge. Semjaza, the leader of the fallen, was hunted next. He had taken refuge on the highest peak of Mount Hermon, the very place he and the others had made their oath of rebellion. The mountain once stood as a monument of beauty, but now it groaned with unholy power. Winds howled unnaturally. The skies above it bled red. Semjaza knew what was coming. He saw the heavens open and felt the weight of eternity bearing down. But he did not run. He was too proud. Too far gone. He stood atop the mountain and raised his hands in defiance as Michael, the commander of heaven's armies, descended with a blade that shimmered like lightning itself. The clash was short. Semjaza tried to summon the power once gifted to him, but heaven had stripped it. His rebellion no longer gave him authority, only chains. Michael struck once. A flash of divine fury. Semjaza collapsed, not dead, but defeated. He too was bound, sealed beneath the mountain that once bore his pride. The very rock he defiled became his tomb. The rest of the Watchers fell like stars from the sky. Each was hunted. Each was judged. Some cried for mercy. Others cursed heaven till their last breath. But none escaped. They were buried deep in the heart of the earth, locked away in the abyss, guarded by eternal flame and forgotten by man. Until now. But the damage had been done. Their sons, the Nephilim, still roamed the earth. Giants filled with rage. With no fathers to guide them, they became wild, feral, more monstrous with each passing day. Some devoured entire villages. Others razed cities from dust only to drown them in blood. And they hated Noah. Not just because he had been chosen, but because he carried something they could never have: redemption. Noah's walk with God was a slap to their existence. He was a mirror reflecting everything they had lost. So they plotted. If they could not destroy heaven, they would destroy Noah. And if they could not reach him, they would corrupt everything around him. His family, his friends, his supplies. One night, one of the Nephilim, named Og, a massive giant whose head scraped the clouds, approached the ark's construction site in the dark. He did not attack. He watched. He wanted to know how it was being built. What kind of wood? What kind of sealant? What shape? The giants were not just brute beasts. They were intelligent, products of angelic genius. Og wanted to build his own vessel. To survive the flood they had heard whispered through the spirit realm. But heaven had already sealed their fate. No vessel could save them. No mountain was high enough. No spell could stop the judgment. And the flood was coming. As Noah hammered the final nails into the ark, the Nephilim stirred. The air grew heavy. Lightning began to split skies without thunder. The animals began arriving, not by force, but by command. Lions walked beside lambs. Vultures beside doves. There was no chaos among them, only divine obedience. The giants saw this and trembled. Nature itself had turned against them. Even the beasts knew the hour. Then the rain began. But it was not normal rain. It came from above and below. The skies burst open. The fountains of the deep exploded. Water didn't just fall, it roared. And in that moment, the Nephilim realized. They were not gods. They were orphans of rebellion, cursed beings born of lust and pride. As the ark rose and the flood swallowed the earth, the giants tried to flee. Some climbed mountains. Others swam, clawing at rocks. A few even tried to cling to the sides of the ark. Legends say one or two survived by clinging to the structure, hidden beneath the beams, too large to enter but desperate not to drown. One of them was Og. But even he, in all his power, would face judgment. And the Watchers? They were buried deep, but their spirits still whispered from the shadows of the earth. Bound but never silenced. Waiting. Watching. Hoping for a day when the chains would be broken and the war would begin again. But for now, the world was being washed. Not cleansed, just reset. Because evil never really dies. It waits. Whispers beneath the waters. The flood swallowed the world in silence. The mountains were drowned. The valleys forgotten. Cities built by the Nephilim crumbled beneath the weight of divine wrath. Their temples, carved in the likeness of their Watcher fathers, stood no more. Every giant who defied the Most High gasped their last breath beneath a sky that no longer listened. But not all were dead. Beneath the raging waters, in ancient caves untouched by the sun, something stirred. Whispers. Echoes. Groans of beings that should have perished. The spirits of the Nephilim, twisted souls, half human, half angel, were now disembodied. Trapped. Roaming. They could not return to heaven, for they were not divine. They could not find rest in Sheol, for they were not fully human. So they wandered, cursed to drift the earth, invisible yet present, hating mankind, envying life, seeking vessels to possess. These were the unclean spirits, the origin of demons. They emerged in silence after the waters receded. Noah's family, fresh from the ark, stepped onto cleansed soil, unaware of what lurked beneath their feet. The sky was clear, the earth smelled new, but the world was not empty. A shadow had survived. Og, the Nephilim king, had not drowned. Clinging to the outer beams of the ark, hidden from Noah's sight, he had survived by cunning and by mercy. For reasons unknown, God allowed him to live. Perhaps to fulfill prophecy. Perhaps to prove a point. But Og, once mighty among giants, was now a fugitive in a new world. The others were gone. He was alone. He wandered lands that had forgotten him, hiding in caves, growing thinner, older, quieter. But he listened. And he watched. Over generations, he saw the children of Noah multiply. The sons of Ham, Shem, and Japheth spread across valleys and mountains. And with them, old sins returned. They began to build again. But not altars. Not temples for the Most High. They built cities. Walls. Towers. Og smiled. Man had not changed. They still desired greatness. And that was all he needed. Over time, stories of mighty ones began to rise among men again. Warriors. Builders of great cities. Nimrod, the hunter of men, was one. A descendant of Cush, but with a spirit that burned with ambition. A man who feared nothing, not even God. Nimrod was no giant. But he bore the same hunger. And that made him dangerous. In the shadows, the disembodied Nephilim watched him. They saw something familiar in his eyes. The same defiance. The same thirst for power. They whispered to him in dreams. Taught him forgotten knowledge. Ancient languages. Astral paths. Geometry not of this world. They convinced him to build not a city, but a gateway. Babel. It wasn't just a tower. It was a spiritual portal. A ziggurat designed to pierce the realm above. A man-made mountain that challenged Eden's boundaries. With every brick, Nimrod defied the heavens. And the watchers from the abyss, they laughed. They knew what he was doing. He was opening a door. A door that hadn't been opened since the flood. But heaven was watching. Before the final stone could be placed atop the tower, before Nimrod could summon what he didn't understand, God came down. Not with wrath, but with disruption. Not a flood. Not fire. But confusion. Languages shattered. Unity dissolved. The tower stood half-built, an eternal reminder that man could reach for the heavens, but not take them by force. The people scattered, but the spirits did not. They followed. Each family that left Babel carried more than a new language. They carried influence. Invisible voices. Ancient suggestions. And slowly, they began to form nations. Cultures. Religions. All rooted in something old. Something that started with the Watchers. Meanwhile, Og still wandered. Now an ancient relic, he had watched entire kingdoms rise and fall. He had no nation. No people. But he had time. And he was waiting for the land of Canaan to be filled with people ripe for destruction. For giants to rise again. Yes, the bloodlines had faded, but not vanished. The descendants of the Nephilim were still among them. Subtle at first. But their features, tall stature, strength beyond men, eyes that didn't blink, betrayed them. And among these bloodlines, a new name began to rise. And from Anakim came a race of giants. Not as great as their fathers before the flood, but strong enough to strike fear into Israel. They built cities with walls that scraped the heavens. Hebron, Gath, Ashdod. Og, now king of Bashan, ruled among them. The Rephaim, the Anakim, the Zamzummim, all remnants of the Nephilim legacy. God had cleansed the earth once. But the stain had returned. And this time he would raise a nation, not to flood the world, but to drive them out. Israel was being prepared. A shepherd boy named David would one day face one of these giants. And though they looked like men, they were not fully human. They were echoes of rebellion. The hidden story of the Nephilim reminds us of the consequences of defiance against divine order. The Watchers who once stood in the light of God chose rebellion and, in doing so, traded their eternal glory for chains and darkness. Their children, the Nephilim, were born from their sin and their disobedience, giants of power but devoid of true life. In the end, their pride led to destruction, while God's justice and mercy prevailed. The moral is clear. No matter how great or powerful one becomes, nothing can defy the will of God. Every action, every choice has consequences that ripple through time. The pursuit of power, when rooted in pride and rebellion, leads only to ruin. But those who walk in humility, honoring God's design, are the ones who endure through the storms of history. Lord, we come before you with grateful hearts, acknowledging your sovereignty and the lessons you teach us through history. We thank you for the strength you give us to stand against pride and rebellion. Help us to always remember that true power comes not from our own strength, but but from submitting to your will. Guard us from the temptation to seek greatness at the cost of our faithfulness to you. May we walk humbly, trusting in your divine plan and guidance. Strengthen our hearts and minds to resist the influence of pride, and give us the wisdom to follow your path. We ask for your protection over our lives, our families, and our nations. Guide us through the trials, and remind us of your grace and mercy, even in the darkest of times. In Jesus' name, we pray.